Well, the Spider-Man multiplayer game or trailer has shown up as a bittersweet gift from the Insomniac leaks from just 2 months ago, seeing what could have been from a live service Spider-Man game that was apparently canceled. Now it has some fans unsure how to respond. Some are welcoming another live service game being kept from launching and potentially failing, while others think that the game had potential. And then there's fans like myself who think that it still could be used within the Spider-Man 2 game or DLC plans as maybe a feature ad or some type of a mode. So first, I want to look at the trailer. Well, I'm just going to describe it to you. I'm not going to put stolen footage into my content. That's too risky. Insomniac could decide to take the video down, and I'm not going to run that risk. Now, there is a second trailer as well that's going to add to some of my theories, because there's different dialogue in the second trailer that hit, and I think that kind of shoots down some of the other theories about how this was just like an internal pitch. This wasn't a game that was close to being made or finished or anything like that. But I also want to remind everybody about some of the roadmaps that leaked that could be attached to this in some way. I think the second trailer especially helps some of the things that I'm going to talk about from those roadmaps specifically. Now, second, I want to look at the reactions to all of this, because the reactions are a little mixed. Some, like I said, they're glad to see another live service game canceled. We've been talking about that in a lot of the content recently. There's a lot of people who are sort of anti-live service. Now, others feel like it's a huge loss of potential, like something that could have been really fun has just been sort of thrown into the bin. Well, lastly, I'm going to tell you what I think, because I certainly had a very different response to when I first saw the trailer, and it seems like a pattern from PlayStation first-party studios right now, so hopefully that pattern can be course corrected. So what happened? So for those of you who remember, about 2 months ago, there was a massive Insomniac leak. It was actually a ransomware group that hacked into Insomniac, and they tried to sell the stolen data, and then they just eventually released it to the public. Now, due to the size of the leak, things are allegedly still coming out from it, and one of those things is these two trailers. One hit yesterday, one hit just this morning, and I was able to go watch it and incorporate some of that dialogue into my coverage because I think it's important. Now, the trailers are for an alleged game called Spider-Man: The Great Web, and both trailers are around a minute. The second trailer is like a minute and 41 seconds, and they basically just show a mixture of concept art and gameplay, and then what looks like sort of stylized in-engine screenshots with like multiple players doing things. And it features 5 players doing multiplayer on the sort of familiar New York City map. But it also features multiverse mechanics and what looks like areas that have been artistically built to have their own distinct styles. One of the areas is almost like a comic book, maybe cartoonish feel. Looks like maybe like a Saturday morning cartoon. And then there's a black and white sort of noir style, and we know that that's sort of hearkening to the different styles that we even saw in the Spider-Verse movies. It also features a bunch of different Spider-Men from across the Spider-Verse. Now, some claim it looks like an internal trailer that was used just to pitch the idea, but given that a second trailer came out, I don't know if you would put that much production into pitching an idea. Usually things look a lot more rough when they're in those early stages, and both of these trailers look like they had a working product of some kind to really say, hey, we should build this, we should do this. And I think it looks more further along than a rough pitch, given that there's built Spider-Verse areas and a mechanic of like diving into these things, and, you know, the art style of the world changes. And there's also the various Spider-Man models. So somebody built those, like the different skins are in the game, but these are actually different Spider-Men, okay? It's important to note that this was apparently going to be a standalone live service game that has been canceled, and based on the villains present in the trailer, it was going to be sort of centering around, or at least starting with, the Sinister Six. Now, Insider Gaming seems to think that it was close to a launchable product from the trailer. They said, quote, "It's narrated by Yuri Lowenthal, who voices Peter Parker, and it looks ready for market. It genuinely appears to be a trailer for a product that could have been released days after it was revealed." Now, I'm not convinced that what we saw in the trailer was ready for market, but it did remind me of the two roadmaps that we saw from the Insomniac leaks, and both of them showed something called Spider-Man 2 Online, which was supposed to launch in the second half of this year in 2024 after Spider-Man 2 released. And the same pattern on these roadmaps was there for Wolverine and for X-Men. A year after their release, you have something called Wolverine Online and something called X-Men Online releasing. And so I think there's the possibility that the deep web was canceled, but maybe elements of it or ideas were used for something completely separate. Maybe some form of co-op gets added later. Spider-Man 2 features 2 main characters. Maybe more show up and you can choose between them and play the game together. The same could happen with Wolverine. I mean, co-op in X-Men would be very easy to picture. Now, one other roadmap worth mentioning before we look at the reactions to this, there is allegedly 3 planned DLCs for Spider-Man 2. Beetle Infestation, Extreme Carnage, and Spider-Verse Anomaly. Now, that last one's going to really come in heavily to my theory here. The first 2 could be your garden variety enemy map update, where they just sort of put new things in the game. Beetle Infestation, and then Carnage. But the last one could be the introduction of the Spider-Verse mechanic that we saw in the trailers and the potential introduction of the people from across the Spider-Verse, the other Spider-Men, which could be how they introduce co-op or multiplayer of some kind into Spider-Man 2. Now, according to this roadmap, this was all supposed to be coming out this year, with the crescendo being holiday of 2024 as the last DLC, the Spider-Verse Anomaly. So we still have not had any official announcements or word from Insomniac about this. They've only done the New Game Plus. They have not done any announcements or confirmation of DLC. There's plenty of Easter eggs and clues that there's more content in DLC coming, but nothing official. Now, obviously, those roadmaps could have just been pitches. They could have been sketches for where they wanted to go. But it's interesting that it lines up with the other 2 roadmaps. It's also worth mentioning that the year leading up to Spider-Man 2 Online, there was a bar running across the roadmap that says multiplayer architecture. And that leads to multiplayer 1.0, which would launch with Spider-Man 2 Online. And then multiplayer 2.0 would launch with Wolverine Online, and multiplayer 3.0 would launch with X-Men Online. Given the timing and that they were apparently building a live service Spider-Man, there is the possibility that the multiplayer architecture was being built, borrowed, or used in some way. And that's what's represented by, like, from 2021 to 2024, there's this bar that just says multiplayer architecture. Well, I mean, that goes back a long time if they started working on some type of multiplayer architecture in 2021. As it stands right now, we have no official word from Insomniac about the live service game, or online modes or roadmaps or anything that happened in Spider-Man 2 or is going to happen in Spider-Man 2. And then this morning, another trailer leaked, and I believe the dialogue from this trailer really points to some timing that they probably had planned for this. It says, "You know, the great web, the interdimensional nexus of life and destiny that connects all of us spider pals together. A few of us here tried to protect it, but we failed." Now, this sounds like content or a game or something that was meant to drop after the Spider-Verse DLC in Spider-Man 2. Now, I always theorized that they would leverage the Spider-Verse for the 3rd game. They would start to use the Ratchet and Clank technology, hopping through rifts. You do that very, very minimally in Spider-Man 2. They kind of introduce the idea once. And I think that's still a very strong possibility. It would make the 3rd game bigger. It would sort of be the crescendo of the story. And we do know from one of the roadmaps that Spider-Man 3, they were considering breaking it into 2 parts, selling each part for $50, launching on PC day and date with multiplayer baked in day 1, which again, I think adds credence to some of this theory that they would have been building something for multiplayer, introducing it into Spider-Man 2, or introducing just a live service game sort of as an interim. So if they already had plans for this live service multiplayer game to serve as that interlude and the furtherance of the main story, it would have led right up to Spider-Man 3. Now, they could still do that inside of Spider-Man 2, just not as a standalone thing. Maybe after the final DLC in Spider-Man 2, they turn on multiplayer, they allow you to play with another person, or maybe 1 or 2 or other people. There's going to be some reactions to the technological, difficulties with this, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But they could essentially turn Spider-Man 2 into an ongoing game, and I'll share my thoughts about that, because I do think that is a possibility with where they take things instead of doing a standalone live service game. So what are some of the reactions to this? Well, first, I will say that Game Logic had some really good input on this, and essentially the TLDR is that keeping 5 people together with the speed of traversal in Spider-Man 2 would be incredibly challenging. The architecture and the tech required would likely have led to arbitrary restrictions like invisible walls, like, hey, you can't go over there. Or they would have had to do degradations to game quality. And I actually think this adds to my theory a little bit. Perhaps they realized that 5 players was just too much. Maybe 2 players is more feasible. In their attempt to build the tech or find a solution, maybe they settled on co-op. Why else would you have a roadmap that includes multiplayer architecture being built and the implementation of that technology across 3 different games if you were planning on doing a live service game? Does that make sense? It's like maybe they decided no live service game, but the architecture being built was good enough to then implement into Spider-Man 2, Wolverine, and X-Men. That makes more sense to me than just scrapping the live service game and moving on completely. Now, on that subject, many have asked, well, who canceled this? Was it Bungie? Was it PlayStation? Was it Insomniac? At this point in time, we don't know, but it does seem to originate from Insomniac. Also, the timing doesn't seem to line up with when Bungie started looking at projects after their onboarding process. So I don't necessarily think there was time for Bungie to be onboarded and look at whatever this project was. The most likely theories are that they encountered challenges when trying to build this, or maybe they just determined that the demand would not be strong enough. We have to remember how demanding it is to release Marvel property. Marvel and Disney want their cut. They want a certain level of sales, and I think this game might have been looked at and thought, you're not going to hit the numbers we need to hit for a Marvel title, and then that is maybe why they plan to incorporate it into Spider-Man 2 instead, because that game's already out and they wouldn't have to hit sales thresholds because it wouldn't be like a new game. Now, when it comes to the trailer itself, some have essentially said it looks like a rough draft. This just looks like they were trying to pitch something. I'm not sure I see it that way, because we now have a second trailer that just doesn't feel like an internal pitch. It feels like they were sort of rough sketching promotional material, not sort of rough sketching the game itself. Now, given how rough the footage of Wolverine was that we saw from the Insomniac leaks, these trailers look largely complete. You've got a closing title screen. The closing title screen restates "Be Greater Together." You have Yuri Lowenthal recording voice lines for it, 2 separate dialogue voice lines. The one phrasing about it says, sometimes you can swing it as a lone wolf, but you're way better off with some friends. Like, this sounds like they had a clear idea in mind, sort of springboarding off of the single-player experiences, being like, yeah, you can play it alone, but hey, it's time to play with some friends. Now, this brings me back to my theory that they could repurpose a lot of this for DLC or some type of a game mode within Spider-Man 2, and if you then say, when you do this mode, it's going to restrict some things, it's going to maybe limit some of your freedom, I think that would make more sense to people. They would say, oh, I'm specifically going into a new mode that has its own rule set, that has its own things that change. Now, on the negative side of things, some folks were saying, this looks bad. I'm glad they canceled it. Now, to elaborate, many think that the concept would have been served better as a mode or a feature inside of Spider-Man 2 rather than a standalone game. Like running around the city and beating up enemies or bosses with 4 people, it's just not the most compelling standalone offer if it was meant to be a game that really lasted and kept you coming back. Especially for folks who are accustomed to playing the Spider-Man games as a single-player game. You're by yourself, you're solo, which runs into a suggestion that I saw from a lot of people. They said, look, just add this to Spider-Man 2. They added Legends to Ghost of Tsushima. This could be something fun they add to Spider-Man 2. Now, this is obviously assuming that they built this game out enough to do that, or that they got over the technological hurdles of 5 people zipping through New York City all at the same time. And for those who were glad to see another live service thing canceled, or a live service service project smack down, one person said, good, I don't want Insomniac to become a live service studio. Now, this is an obvious nod to what happened with Naughty Dog and what they said about why they canceled The Last of Us Online, which I still believe Naughty Dog got taken to school by Bungie and was basically told, you have no idea what it takes to maintain a live service game. Like, you're in the dark on this. It's very possible that other studios are coming to similar conclusions. Like, listen, we're not set up for this. We're not set up to support an ongoing game. We're not support to, maintain the content rhythm that you would need to in order for a live service game to be successful. Now, this also led to some people saying it looks like they made the same mistake that Naughty Dog did. They thought they could just pivot and just make a live service game and, hey, this will be fun. It certainly looks like a pattern within PlayStation that, hey, single player studios, they can take a crack at live service, right? And it doesn't seem to be going all that well. Many at PlayStation are probably thinking, thank God for Helldivers 2 right now. Live service can work, but it can't be a side project. You can't just decide, hey, I got an idea. Let's do God of War Online. Like, they stick to your core competencies. I really think PlayStation needs to reevaluate who they are tasking with building live service games. Not because they can't make something that would be fun and compelling, but because they can't support it ongoing when the time would require. So, what are my thoughts on this situation? I'm going to be dead honest with you. When I first saw this trailer, I thought, well, that looks like Spider-Man 2 DLC. It just didn't feel like a standalone game. And that's not me slamming it. It was just the general vibe. It was still in New York City. It was a lot of the same attacks and a lot of the same enemies that we've seen. So the impression was like, oh, hey, they're going to push out multiplayer into Spider-Man 2. It'll be like a DLC, which, as I said, that could still be possible in some way. And I'm going to be honest about something else. A standalone Spider-Man live service game would not be able to stand on its own. I firmly believe that. This feels like another Naughty Dog situation where they said, hey, we've got popular IP, let's do a live service game. It's sort of in the same arena and commentary that I've made about live service games before. You can't just add a battle pass and seasons to something. Those are technical solutions. You need psychological ones, right? Why would people keep coming back to a game like Spider-Man to play with their friends? One of the most compelling things about the gameplay is managing all of the enemies, stringing together your moves and abilities, getting really big combos, having these cinematic quick-time event, almost movie-like experiences, as well as the boss fights. That doesn't really lend itself to the recipe of like, oh, this is an ongoing game that I keep coming back to because it's so fun to play with my friends. You need a content loop and gameplay built around playing with others. Take Helldivers 2, for example. You can play by yourself, but you're quickly going to see the rough edges of a game because it was built to be played with others. And the inverse would be true of Spider-Man. If it's a game where you're playing by yourself and suddenly you're playing with other people, you would quickly feel those rough edges where 5 people are jumping, swinging, and punching all at the same time. I do think 2-player co-op could work. I've said that since the AI co-op fights in the Batman games. But I remember a mission where you and Robin were having to use the same perches and gargoyles at the same time, and it led to some comical and even a little bit frustrating moments. You're like getting in each other's way. Now, the same could be true of Spider-Man. I would say that maybe the silver lining from the leak is that they're now getting player feedback and consumer response to something that maybe they were planning on utilizing. Maybe they were going to shelve this and bring it out later. Well, now they're getting a bunch of market research. I'm pulling for the multiplayer architecture actually being built and then utilized in Spider-Man 2, Wolverine, and X-Men. I think that sounds like a recipe for good additive content, good additive experiences, because I love playing co-op games with my wife. I love playing co-op games with my kids, and I think it would be a great add to Spider-Man 2, because just the other day my son was saying, hey, can we play that game together? But that's just my take on it. What's yours?